Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of OHKO, a Pokemon VGC podcast. Now, you might be looking at me and be like, yo, who is this guy? Why is he here? Who are all these other guys, too? They haven't been on the podcast. Well, I'll have you know, unfortunately, because Sierra's voice was hurting a little bit, she wants to rest it for Worlds. We're all here. So, all the token caster boyfriend / husbands, pretty awesome, So we're here, we're ready to do the podcast. So obviously we have Pengy here. Stefan, if you want to introduce yourself at all to any of the viewers who do not know you at home, feel free.
My name is Stefan Mott. I also go by Pengy. I'm a VGC player, which is why I'm here. And I'm excited to just kind of talk about Pokemon. It's gonna be fun.
Sweet. I also forgot to mention, by the way, Joe Brown is working at the Olympics, which is why he's not here as well, for anyone wondering. So, pretty cool. Or, I miss my boy Joe Brown, but of course, he's got to get his bag at the Olympics. All right, Baris, you're up next. For anyone who doesn't know you, feel free, introduce yourself to everyone.
Hey, I'm Baris Ackos from Germany. I've been playing VGC for quite a while now, probably towards the end of my career, but still holding on as one of the top 16 players from Europe this season, going in with a bye in round one for Worlds, just to set the scene. Very excited to be on the podcast. Thanks for the invitation.
Hell yeah, man. And, for myself, my name is Joseph Ugarte, otherwise known as Joe UX9 Online, full-time competitive player. Finished second in NA this year, a little bit worse than last year, but that's all right. We'll recover, and competing in Worlds as well. So, excited to have all y'all here. So obviously we're just going to get right into it. So the first question, of course, is when are you guys actually leaving for Worlds? So today is, what day is it today, actually? Today's
Wednesday, yeah.
Yes, today's Wednesday, the week before Worlds. So what's actually the date? I should say the date. Yeah. It's the 7th when we're recording. So when are you guys leaving from now?
I'm leaving on Friday, so I get in about a week early, get to adjust to the time zone, see some of the Hawaii just area. It's gonna be fun. Nice little chill place to kind of finalize the prep.
Yeah, and I'm actually flying off tomorrow morning, so I've less than, I think, 12 hours from now on before we fly. Started packing, got the essentials packed. We're just gonna sort out my Switch, charging cables, headphones, everything, get ready for the tournament. And then we're leaving a little bit early this time because we won't be able to stay after Worlds, as we're flying home straight after Monday. So we have a few days before Worlds. It's a really weird trade-off in terms of when you travel to Worlds and how long you stay, because the days before Worlds, they're typically just busy with prep. Nobody wants to really do anything. People are just busy, hardcore prepping their matchups, their lines, their calcs. I'm probably taking it a little bit easier. We have a few things planned in Hawaii, really excited. And then maybe next Tuesday, Wednesday, then going into hard prep mode for Worlds, the last few details, I guess.
Yeah, that's kind of thing. I'm getting in on Monday, and I'm like, wow, maybe I'll enjoy a day or two, and then I'm just gonna be sitting there thinking about Worlds the whole time. Because it's kind of hard not to, right? You're going there, and it's we're going to Hawaii, so obviously we should enjoy the place. It should be a vacation. But I'm just sitting there. I'm like, damn, man, I really want to win. I gotta prep. So, but of course, ideally our prep is all done before we get there, but that's not always how it goes sometimes. But yeah, I think the thing with Hawaii Worlds too, which is really cool, is even though it's still in the United States, I feel for a lot of US people, it does feel really far away, right? Because you're taking such a long trip out there. It's very different culturally from the rest of the US as well. So I think it's going to be a really cool experience. And the fact that we're going back there after Worlds happened there so much longer ago, right? I think it's a really cool experience. So I'm really excited to see it. Adds another state onto my list of all the states I'm trying to go to. So it's pretty awesome, I think. And overall, how are you guys feeling for Worlds? Because I know for myself, with my prep and everything, I'm kind of I feel good, but it's Worlds, so you're always thinking oh man, I really want to win, I really want to do well. So there's always something that you think about what you could be doing better. But what about you, Baris? What are you thinking about
I have been busy most of the summer with work, and then with a few weddings to visit as well. So I couldn't spend as much time as I would like to for Worlds. I think I've finally decided on the 6 that I want to bring. Feeling pretty confident. 6 strong Pokemon, I suppose, and then just try to play a little bit better than my opponent. That's the plan here. But also, it's again, I'm taking it a little bit easier. I'm just looking forward to the holiday. playing a little Pokemon on the side. And I might not be as ambitious as other players going into this tournament, but I guess that's the beauty of Pokemon. It's for everyone, the hyper competitive ones and the ones trying to stay alive out here.
Jeez, you make it sound like you're struggling here, man. Like
my guy has a bye round one, gets to sleep in.
He's like, man,
cash in a big old travel award. He's like, oh, I'm so old. I don't know these new Pokemon anymore. Like,
yeah.
I mean, last year I went through day one, and then in day two, I think I played against 3 teenagers, literally teenagers, and I could feel my back as I'm standing up from my loss. Like I went like 0-3 against 3 teenagers, basically, knocking me out of Worlds. But yeah, beyond that, I mean, yes, it is tough out here.
Yeah, and then for you, Stefan, like how are you feeling overall for Worlds? Feeling good? Feeling like so? Like where are you at? You think?
I feel like our team is really, really, really good. Everybody's been getting really good results with it on ladder and locals. And like I'm really, really happy with the team composition and the amount of work that we've put into all of the minute details, messing around with like all of the various like Terra types, tiny spread optimizations. All of that's really good, and it's been locked for like a month and a half for the most part, which also feels good because like we have all of these established lines. We know everything really well. Not as confident in my play recently. I won 2 challenges, which is nice. My local scene's kind of hard, but like I feel like I definitely have some work to do on my own level of play in the next week for Worlds. So we'll see. It's a little bit stressful for me this year because like 2 years ago was my first Worlds, and you go in and you're like, it's my first Worlds. I'm just happy to be here. And then last year, I was one of 3 people who forgot to submit my team sheet. So
that's
I woke up at like 5:30 to get there like 3 hours before it started to try to get them to like allow me in. But like I missed the deadline. So I took a round 1 loss, had no sleep, was like in a really bad mental place, and then just went 0-3.
Mm-hmm.
So I would really like to not do that this year. So I feel like I have a little bit of like self-imposed pressure, and like I definitely could level up my play a little bit in the next week. But overall, I feel like reasonably good. For Worlds, I usually lock my team pretty far in advance. Like I've been able to do that the last couple of years, so like that feels good. I'm not the kind of guy who plays super well if I take the team like a week before. Like I'm just not capable of getting the same results as like other people who sometimes are like, I built this at 4 a.m. Joe.
No, well, guilty,
yeah.
I guess.
How are you feeling, Joe?
Actually, I feel pretty good about this Worlds. I took a really different approach than the previous years. So in 22, I ended up kind of doing that last minute team lock thing, but it was into something I was comfortable with, which was Sun in 22. And it felt pretty good. I mean, I top cut both Worlds I've competed at so far, so I feel good about it. It's just, I think one thing that is really important to note is the difference between top cut and winning Worlds is like such a big difference, So even though like I've top cut 2 Worlds, like to me, it's like, no, like my goals are a lot bigger than that. So for me, I've really been trying to change up like my approach, because I feel like Worlds is a very interesting tournament, right? Because normally like your tournaments are like, you think it's just prep and it's like your team, but I feel like there's like this different air about Worlds. I mean, it's kind of hard to, I guess, quantify until you're like sitting there in the Worlds venue, but like it feels different. You know what I mean? Like the tournament, the energy of it, like everyone like even acts differently, at Worlds, because it's just like such a serious tournament. It's like the product of all your work and like effort throughout the year, right? And for me, like I feel good about it. And like one thing I've tried to do with my approach this year is, play a bunch of practice tournaments, use a bunch of different teams, like not limit myself necessarily to one specific type of team, but kind of practice with like a lot of different cores, so that way at least I know what I like. And also too, just feeling confident as a player overall. Like one thing that I feel really good about this year that I think is different from previous years is I genuinely think walking into that building, I'm one of the most prepared players in terms of like at least like playing the game. Like I know that I've played more games and put in more reps than like almost everyone in that building pretty much. So to me, like that helps me a lot, even though like maybe like the team's not completely perfect, whatever I end up bringing. Like I know that I have so many games like of Regulation G that I feel really good like competing there. And I think that's like just as important sometimes as like having the perfect team, because you could have the world's winning team and you could either get unlucky, get a bad bracket, you could just like not play well on the day of, right? Or like you can mentally let something get to your head and lose. So there's so many factors I think that go into Worlds. Not that it doesn't go into other tournaments, but it feels very like highlighted at Worlds, I think.
Tournament in specific I saw had, I think, 6 Miraidon in top 8, which was pretty insane. So yeah, that's definitely picking up in usage, or I guess manifesting itself.
Yeah, and I think the thing is right now, like Miraidon's like the team that everyone's like focused on is like the really scary Worlds team. But to be honest with you, I think there are a lot more scarier teams. Like Zine's team, because there were like 6 Miraidons, kind of flew under the radar in that tournament. Just to get into like, you know, obviously the tournaments a little bit. His team was actually like really like crazy good in my opinion. It was like a CSR balance team, which at the face value, you look at the picture, you're like, okay, this is just basic CSR balance. Like, why do I care? But it had like some really like interesting techs and like different moves on it. Like I was able to beat him actually in the tournament, but it was like not like super easy. And like a lot of the things he had on his team were like very unique from like other CSR compositions. So I feel like the Japanese in particular are developing Calyrex Shadow Rider and Miraidon a lot, but Calyrex Shadow Rider is going a little bit more under the radar just because Miraidon's like performing so well right now, you know?
Yeah. I think like one of the things that I think all of us, for the most part, are like kind of in agreement on that makes, in my opinion, at least prepping for this World's a little bit easier, is that like this format is just so absurdly centralizing that like from a prep perspective, it's kind of nice that like you only have to prep for a couple of things, right? Like I feel like Reg D last year, first tournament of that format, a bunch of new mons added, like it was really, really hard to have a real idea of like what the meta was going to be going into Worlds. Like I feel like people just brought stuff last year, and it was like, all right, here's my team. It's nobody else in this tournament's running this, and like, whereas for this team, there are all those like really small things that do change the way the team plays, like things that do adjust the way a Miraidon team plays or the way a CSR balanced team plays. But like, there's like 5 restricteds that are viable, and like 2 of them are like not as good as the others. So like, I feel like this Worlds is going to be just so absurdly centralized from like a macro scale that it's going to be really, really interesting to at least see like more of those small changes.
So I guess to follow up on that, right? Like what restricted, because you mentioned there are only 5 viable ones, right? I would like probably think a little bit differently about that, which we can get into later. But like what 5 restricteds do you think are the ones then that are like actually matter in the tournament?
Yeah, so I think like there are more viable, like only 5 viable ones is like a little bit of a strong way to phrase it. But I feel like it is difficult to justify not using a Calyrex or Miraidon. Like, they are just so much better than everything else. And it's like, yeah, you could build like a Koraidon team that's good, or like a Groudon team that's good. And then like below those 3, you have like Kyogre. But like, I feel like any restricted that's not those 3, you're just kind of opting into a matchup roulette, where it's like, yeah, Kyogre matches up super well into Ice Rider, and like there's a couple of Kyogre teams that do pretty well into Shadow Rider, but like, do you really want to bring Kyogre into a tournament where like Miraidon is going to see 30% usage? Like, or like, you could bring like Groudon, where it's like, oh, Groudon like hard counters Miraidon, like let's go. It's like, do you really want to bring that into like Ice Rider territory? So like, I feel like you're kind of opting into that really awkward matchup roulette if you don't bring one of those 3. And then like below them, you do have like Kyogre is good. Like you can build a Kyogre team that will like do well, especially if you hit your matchups. And like Koraidon can play the game, I guess, but like it just feels like you're hamstringing yourself if you don't bring one of those 3 restricteds.
I got a question for that. So if we say Calyrex and Miraidon are our like top 3, what is everyone's pick on the best performing restricted outside of these 3?
Zacian.
Zacian?
Some Zacian guy is not going to miss their play roughs. That's what's going to happen.
So we're predicting for Worlds?
For Worlds, yeah. Outside of Calyrex and Miraidon, which restricted Pokemon is going to place the highest?
I think for me, like, okay, so very like random mon, I guess, to bring up. I actually really think Lunala is going to do well. Everyone I talk to is telling me Lunala is bad, and I still think about this Japan Nats team that this one player used. It was like Umbreon, Chiyu, Iron Jugulus, like Rilla, Ursh, and Lunala. And I remember I played this team against this team at like a local, right? It's this new player, so it's not like, they're playing like crazy or anything. But I'm playing against them. I'm like, dang, this team's like actually not that bad until like a lot of Miraidon teams, right? Like it was fine for me. Like I was able to beat it, but like I was kind of thinking about like how like annoying like Sash, Shifu, AV, Rilla, and like leftovers Terra Fairy, Lunala are into like a lot of Miraidon teams, right? Because they're so dependent on you having the terrain and like the Iron Hands being able to fake out everything. So I was kind of like, damn, like this isn't actually that bad. And like it was also like an Umbreon with Reflect, like randomly, but like it actually was really annoying. And I was thinking about it. I was like, like I feel like random like restricteds like those that like everyone's writing off are like the ones that are going to do really well. Not necessarily from like every player, but I think what Japan does really well, honestly, is in team building. I feel like they're a lot more open to like unique ideas or like concepts, right? So typically it results in like unique restricteds you typically wouldn't expect to do well, like performing better, right? And it was even like really interesting because playing in Teru, right, the Teru Run Challenge that I played in, like I felt like there like a lot of it was common restricteds for sure. Like I don't think you're wrong in saying like Miraidon, Kali Ice are the ones you bring if you like want a consistent team that's going to do the best into the field, probably, right? But like in the Teru Challenge, I felt like there was a lot more like exploration and like kind of being more adventurous with like your choices for restricted, and I feel like that's one place where like the US, Europe can really like fall short sometimes, is like we kind of like lock in on like what the meta is and then just focus on developing it the whole like format, right? But one thing that I feel like Japan is really good at is innovating on stuff that you think isn't good. And not necessarily because I think like there's always this argument that like, Japan is like always going to do well. Like everyone says it every year and Japan doesn't always win. But I just think that in terms of innovation, that's where they have like a really distinct advantage over like the rest of the world.
I feel like I definitely agree with that. But even when it comes to stuff like Lunala is a good point. Lunala is a Pokemon that's like definitely usable. But I feel like really all of those do kind of opt into some amount of matchup roulette. And ultimately, like, it's fine to do that if you think that you have a read on the tournament, or if you think that you have a specific line that the people are not going to find into you, where it's like, oh, like, I have this hyper-specific line into Calyrex Shadow Rider, like, if they do this, I lose. But, like, it's hidden enough that you don't think they're going to go for it, or you have a way to condition them to not go for it. Like, you can go through there. And if you're the only person in the field or one of the only people running something like if somebody rolled up with, like, Reshiram, like, nobody has their Reshiram lines prepped, right? Like, even if it is not as good as the other ones, like, it could work. But, yeah, I think we'll probably see a decent amount of Kyogre do okay.
I agree.
I do think there's going to be, like, one Zacian that, like, makes it pretty deep.
Yeah, I think Zacian is like one of those ones.
Misses a player off and then loses. Like,
yeah, well, yeah, that's kind of how it goes, right? I think like Zacian's a really interesting one too because Zacian is like such a unique like Pokemon. I think in general, right? Like it was dominating in Sword and Shield, right? It was really good to counter the mechanic of Dynamax, right? And now we're in obviously Scarlet and Violet. It received a nerf, right? Like its ability's way worse, but like Instin's also way worse than it was like in previous formats, right? So even though someone might look at that at face value and be like, oh, okay, well, like it's worse as a Pokemon, I feel like it has so many unique tools and like applications to a lot of situations, right? Like a big thing that I think, maybe this negatively impacts some Zacian players, but like a lot of Calyrexes before used to run Terra Fairy on their Rex, so you would have Behemoth Blade into the Clef and then Behemoth Blade into the Cali, right? And you could set up like some pins that way. And then obviously now they've shifted to normal and dark as Terra types, right? Dark is actually kind of beneficial for Zacian because you can play rough into it, right? But I feel like there's like a lot of interesting paths to explore with Zacian that maybe haven't been explored the most. I definitely expect like a couple Japanese players to bring it because right before Japan Nats actually Kinugawa like posted a video where like he was using just like Zacian like rain stuff and like he got #1 on rank battles with it. He didn't bring it to Nats for some reason. So like I could definitely just see a couple players like just bring it like later on at Worlds, especially if you think it's like a better call for best of 3, which I think it is actually. So
yeah. One of the things that I think is a little interesting about like almost all of these other Pokemon, and the reasons that like I really think that like it's a Calyrex Miraidon angle, is that like it does feel like almost every other restricted, while they are good, are heavily reliant on these inaccurate moves. Because like, yeah, Behemoth Blade doesn't miss, but Zacian's most important offensive move is Play Rough. And, like, Lunala's most important move on a lot of sets is Meteor Beam. And, like, Reshiram, to bring that random one back in, it's like Blue Flare, 85 accuracy, Groudon, 85 accuracy. And, like, playing in, like, this long of a tournament, I guess, like, Worlds is less rounds than, like, our regionals have been this year. So, like, there is a lower chance of losing enough games to those misses that, like, Worlds is kind of the place where you would want to do that if you were down to play that kind of a game. But, like, I'm not brave enough. I'm not brave enough to bring, like, a Meteor Beam Lunala to Worlds. Like, I'm just scared.
Yeah, I saw this team rising up with Kyogre, which we talked about earlier, the Calm Mindset specifically. And it looks like super strong as long as you hit your Origin Pulses, I suppose.
Yeah.
And I
Well,
guess
like some of the guys are dropping Origin Pulse for Pump now to, like, get around Wide Guard. It's like, that's even less accurate, brother.
Yeah, can't get around redirection either.
Yeah.
To follow up on that, I guess, Baris, are there any teams that you think, or like any restricteds you think are flying under the radar that like would be like really good calls for Worlds? Or do you think that it's like kind of what Stefan said, of just like, there's the meta 3 horses, maybe like a couple other guys, and then that's it? Or do you think there's like maybe like some ideas that are,
I mean, we saw Joji playing Terrapagos to great success in Europe earlier this season. And I think Japan actually likes Terrapagos a little bit more than the other regions, you could say, even though some Europeans also did really well. And of course, at NAIC, it got second place with Grimmsnarl. So I feel like there is more room for exploration in terms of Terrapagos. And it's interesting that Aurelien was able to take it to second place in NAIC. And then afterwards, at least from my perspective, we didn't see it as often or as frequent as you would think. So I'm really curious to see what Aurelien specifically, but also any other former Terrapagos player is cooking up for Worlds. That's definitely a big one for me. We saw Koraidon doing well. I'm not really a big Koraidon believer, but I can see it doing well in certain compositions, I suppose. But yeah, these are the 2 big ones that we haven't really talked about. Beyond that, I mean, we talked about the length of Worlds. It's going to be like 8 rounds on the first day, and then 2 more rounds the next day. 3, not quite sure.
Yeah, I think
on
it's
the final numbers.
Yeah, I think there's like 800 something players. So my assumption would be like 12 rounds, 12, 13, something like that.
I thought it was 11 or 12.
Yeah, 12 sounds like accurate to me. I don't know 100% because kind of doing it on the fly, but I think like 12 would make sense because then that would mean like, I think do you need an X2 record to cut, or do you need a X3? It's X2, right?
It's X2, and then like everybody. No, it's like if top 8 is X3, then it's all X3s. Okay. So like it kind of depends how that shakes out. Probably X2 with this many players.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, because you qualify for D2, but isn't it top 32 or X and 2, whichever is greater?
No, it's X and 2. No, it's top 8.
Oh wow!
And then if there's an 8. If there's a top, like if the 8th place person has like whatever the 8th place person's record is, down to top 32. So like resistance could impact, like let's say top 8 was like X3, and then the X3s went down to like 41, then 9 people would be eliminated on res.
Oh, okay, all right. No, that's it. So that's interesting.
It's a little interesting.
Yeah,
I like it kinda like you obviously don't want to get into a position where you're playing like a round of 64 play-in because like that's just way too many single elimination rounds in Pokemon. But I think it's a decent format.
So cut is 8 then, basically.
No,
8 to 32.
8 to 32. No. Okay. So it'll probably be a higher number than 8.
Yeah, probably like 20 something.
Okay.
Like, so like
similar
to the last.
So like usual.
Years, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, so that makes sense. Yeah, I was really confused for a second because I'm like, for real? I was like,
the format's weird to explain.
I think it's actually interesting.
Yeah,
it's interesting to try it out for Worlds. Absolutely. I think the way it works, if we assume that it's 12 rounds, then we're going to play 8 rounds on the first day, and everyone with at least 6 wins is allowed to play on for the next day,
right?
While they keep their record, and then we're to play another 4 rounds or 3 rounds, for example.
Right.
And then everyone who has the same record as the 8th place.
Okay, all right, I got it now.
It is kind of interesting to think about, like, the effect that might have on, like, some people's team building. Like, I don't know how many people think about this, but for example, if I was running Zacian, like I tried Zacian a little bit a couple months ago, thought it was really fun, but I missed too many play roughs. But like if I were running Zacian, like I would feel a lot more okay bringing that into like last year's Worlds format, where over 2 days I could go 10-4 and make top cut. As opposed to like here, you probably need to go 10-2 to make top cut. Like if you're running an inaccurate Pokemon, like this format is a little bit less forgiving than like the previous Worlds format. So that might be another reason why some people kind of like gravitate away from really, really important moves on their team not being at least 90% accurate.
Yeah, I mean, I guess if you're comparing old Worlds formats, yeah, no, that makes sense. I think overall, like, I mean, it's weird, right? So I feel like making, like, picking as someone who's actually picked like kind of inaccurate moves for like a tour before, it's interesting because there's like definitely like a benefit and a drawback, right? So like for me in 22, right, like. A perfect example of this is I actually made it all the way to cut, right? And then I remember I lost the Flavio Delpedio because I just whiffed like 4 sleep powders. And then in game 2, like I played like perfectly. And then I just whiffed the blades and got Fiery Wrath flinch, right? So like your odds of like your margin of error is like even lower. I feel like when you take like inaccurate moves, it's just like in some cases you get a bit higher returns with like, for example, like you could technically turn any matchup into like a 75-25 if you have the right tools and the opponent has the right composition for it, right? So if we're talking about sleep powder specifically, right? But obviously there are other offensive compositions too and things that do that. But I think it's an interesting choice, right? Do you pick consistency for Worlds or do you pick something that's a little bit more risky, but it gives you higher returns if you like land all your moves on that day, right? And for me personally, I've come to the conclusion after playing like riskier teams for a while, for Worlds specifically, it's nice to have something that like can almost always land its moves, right? Because like at least like 90 is fine and like 85 is maybe passable. But once you get into like 75, like I would be fine doing that for like a regional or like something else because like you know you have like a ton of those. But Worlds you get like once a year, so it's like you kind of want to bring something that's like a bit more consistent. But you know, talking about Worlds actually and talking about how the field you know is going to be narrowing down to that 10-2, right? Let's say you're going for you want that 10-2 record, right? You're sitting there, you're at like 7-2, right? It's you know you won your first game of day 2 maybe, or you know maybe you're doing even better. Maybe you're like 8-1 or something, right? You see a name slip, and you see a name slip, and you're like, oh man, like what player would that be? What player would you like not want to play in the tournament before Top Cut? And if there is an answer, that's fine.
So for me, there's two. So what kind of an answer are you looking for here? Are you looking for who do I think is like the most strong player that like I wouldn't want to play against because of their strength at the game, or like that I wouldn't want to play against personally? Like, so I guess I'll give you both answers. I don't want to play Lorcy. I don't win against Lorcy. I don't know what he just like every single I feel like I play every set against him differently because like I go in and I'm like he read me perfectly last time. I'm gonna play it, and he just keeps doing it. He just keeps living inside my head, and like it just I don't win against Lorcy. But from like a player strength perspective, I think like Michael Kelsch is like just insane. Just like the way he looks at the game and the way he approaches the game is like really impressive and very, very scary. I've never played against him at like a major, but whenever I played him on Limitless, like we play good sets. Like I like keep up with him, but I always feel like he's the better player. And then like Aurélien probably like Aurélien is just insane as well. Like has had an amazing season. There's some players that like going into Worlds, it kind of feels like if there's a script writer, like there are people who are gonna win. Like Aurélien deserves a really deep Worlds run. Like Roxanne kind of deserves a really deep Worlds run. Maybe we get like the Michael Kelsch like redemption arc, like winning Worlds after getting second. You know, like there's a lot of people who I think could like go crazy from like a script writing perspective who are also just like really, really good. So like any of those would be a little scary.
Yeah. What about you, Baris?
I mean, I think Stefan still wants to get revenge from our set in Brazil where I kind of robbed him. So I guess that would be quite exciting. Yeah, and then I don't think I've taken a set of Joe at an official tournament yet either. So that would be just nice to play, who I really want to avoid. I mean, I think Michael Couch is a big name. I feel like not only has he all his lines prepped, but he knows like all the calls that you wouldn't even think about. So like that's definitely a scary player. I know Wolf is obviously like taking this game super serious, and he will be super well prepped for Worlds. So like it's not really, I guess if you want to win Worlds, you have to beat anyone anyway. Beyond that, I'm just excited to play a little bit more Pokemon and get some really good games in.
Wolf is a good point. It's going to be really interesting to see how Wolf performs at this tournament. I think, like, obviously Wolf is Wolf. Don't want to play against Wolf at Worlds, but it's kind of interesting that like my guy rolled up to 3 regionals, won 2 of them, got second at the other one, but like also didn't cut either of the internats that he went to. So I think like it's just going to be really interesting to see how this world, like how this world's like goes for Wolf. And I think especially after like last year, he was really disappointed at like not making it out of day one. Like I kind of feel like there's a very decent chance that like Wolf just makes an insanely deep run and just like goes like crazy, like first seed out of Swiss, I think.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I find really interesting about Wolf is I feel like honestly every year, like looking at his, because like obviously like I've seen his Worlds videos and I've talked to him before, right? And I feel like he has a really like great understanding of the game, and he can play really well with like some of the best standard options in the game. I remember I had a conversation with him at some point. We were talking about like Pokemon or whatever. It was like a UIC or something. I was like, why don't you just use like the best Pokemon like all the time? I'm like, your fundamentals and how well you know the game are so good. I'm like, I felt like if instead of making calls sometimes you just brought the best teams, like you would just like win more, you know? And obviously like, you know, you have to make some sort of adjustments or like calls for Worlds, or like you have to like change some things on standard builds to suit your preferences. But I feel like honestly, if he brings something that's just like standard with maybe like a few like quirky things that work for him, you know, he could make a really, really deep run at Worlds. And I really feel like honestly, like one difference that like, because I paid attention a lot, especially in prep like last year and then, you know, this year. So like what is every player's like kind of trends and like how do they approach Worlds like uniquely? I feel like Wolf a lot of the time like looks for like a really good Worlds call that like kind of like beats a lot of the metagame. But like for example in like 2023, right, that format I felt like there wasn't really a call. You just had to bring a team that let you outplay the rest of the field. It wasn't like, because it was a national dex format, right?
Yeah.
And then in 22, right, there were some pretty established archetypes. You could go like a little bit off like base of like what the you know, most common like meta things were, right? But like realistically you kind of wanted to stick within like the best combinations of restricteds, right? So I'm really interested to see if like the approach this year is like, since like the rest of the year has been, I'm going to use standard good Pokemon and like play better than my opponents with that. If that's something that Wolf carries into this world, or if he tries to like kind of do I'm going to like come up with a really good meta innovation that like people aren't ready for. Because I feel like that's always like the really interesting thing to see from him when he like approaches Worlds.
I think like the correct answer is probably somewhere in the middle, especially for somebody who has those kinds of really, really good fundamentals. Where like I really like the way he approached kind of NAIC, for example, where it's like, yeah, like he brought Caloric Shadow Rider, like that's just a good Pokemon. But it was like a rain team with Terra. I think it was a rain team with Terra Water, Terra Blast. Like that's something that nobody else was doing, and it's like a really interesting way to innovate on something that is still using good mons. Like it's not doing something like crazy out of left field, but it's also something that will throw off the established lines that people have into that kind of a team. So you still get to use like the really good mon without having to play from behind in a position where like I'm using 6 mons with 6 sets that my opponents played 100 games into. They know exactly how to play this matchup. It's going to be a little harder to outplay them. So like finding that kind of balance, like I did think the Worlds team was a really good example, and like, or the NAIC team rather was a really good example. So if he manages to find that balance and also just like have a good weekend, you know.
Yeah, and you know, obviously to build on that a bit more. Actually, I should probably say this before we move on to next topic, because I just realized I never gave my answer, and I made you guys give your answers. So in terms of someone I wouldn't want to play, it for like a personal reason, it would be Kian Campbell, just because he performed really well with Zacian early in the season. We're just good friends, and like I think he just has like this kind of mental block against me. Like he says it every time. He's like, I can't beat Joe, so like I don't want to like mess up his Worlds run at all, or like make him like second guess. So I'd just rather not play him like early on. And then in terms of, actually, I don't think there's really anyone I wouldn't want to play. I think it's actually for me the opposite. Like I actually really do want to play like Aurelian, I think, because we had a really close set in Liverpool, and I ended up losing. It was like absurd. It was like something like a 6.3% roll. Like the Chiyu lift key crashed on like one. Like it was like a super close set. And like I would really like the run back with Aurelian, especially because like I feel like playing against the best players in the tournament, if you play them in Swiss and you beat them, you're like, damn, like I could win this whole thing, you know? So I feel like it's like a really nice like reassurance thing. But anyways, to go back to what we were talking about now, we talked about Wolf a lot in, you know, we kind of broke down like all the process, everything, how he typically approaches events. For Worlds itself, right? If you guys couldn't say yourself, right? Because obviously we'll take ourselves out of this equation. Who do you think are like the biggest threats if you had to pick like one player that you think really could take it home or like has like everything like right to like take it home this year pretty much? We can start with Baris if you want, since what's it called? Been a minute since you talked.
I do believe in the Michael Kalsch back, like running it back and having a very deep run, if not go for first place. It was interesting how his season went. Like he was obviously also qualified for Worlds through his second place, but then he still felt like he needed to prove himself and be like, "Hey, I'm not just going off the one-time good Worlds run. I actually want to qualify." So he made sure that he gets like 400 CP to hit the CP bar. Then suddenly he decides, "Hey, actually, I can take this even further. Let's go for the Travel Award." Rocks up to locals, maxed out locals, go like wins Stockholm regional, and I think like he has everything that you would ask for to win Worlds, basically. So he's definitely a big favorite, and unless something very unlucky happens, I expect his name to be at least in top 8, maybe even further.
What about you, Stefan? What do you think?
I do think the obvious answer is Wolf. Like it is also like a cop-out answer, but like my guy won 2 out of 3 regionals he went to and got to the finals of the other one. So like we'll see. Other than Wolf, I think like obviously Aurelien has had a really, really good season again. Like Aurelien is just an unreal consistent player. It would be really, really surprising for Aurelien not to make cut. I think Edu's been doing really, really well again. Like also just an incredible player, and so those would be like my three kind of basic picks. Like it's always possible that somebody like that we don't know, just like Patrick Connors, like rolls up and just like does super well. But at Worlds, I feel like it's more likely to be somebody who has been established and has like almost earned the run in a way. Like it's very, very rare that people just like roll up and like have like a mid-season qualify for Worlds and then just like get top 8, right? Like that doesn't really happen all that often from like since I've been in the scene at least. So like those would be my 3 picks.
Yeah, I would say for myself, I mean, a couple players, I guess, that have like kind of caught my eye, at least that I would expect to have Deep Worlds run. I don't know necessarily like win. I mean, Aurelien to me, like honestly, the way this season has been going, like if there was like a quote unquote like storyline that was going to be completed, like I think it would be Aurelien winning Worlds personally. Like I just think that like is the most fitting like conclusion to like Worlds, to be honest, or like this season in particular, based on Aurelien's consistency. If I wasn't going with like the basic answer, which is obviously Aurelien, right? I feel like honestly, a big thing that I could not be surprised by this year is if the person that wins Worlds is like a less known player. And the reason why I think so is because we've seen like over the course of this game growing more and more like newer players kind of like having deep runs, right? So I think back to like Justin Tang, right? 2 regionals in his first season, right? Abdullah, or Sempra, right? Being able to win in Vancouver, right? And then getting top 8 at Worlds right after, right? And then we have Tim Edwards get second at EUIC, and then we have Patrick Connors win NAIC. Like the amount of new talent that's been starting to like win these events, right? Like I think it's definitely signaling a new change in VGC, and I think a lot of players that have been around for a bit longer still look at it and they're like, oh yeah, only like veteran players can win Worlds. But I actually think like more than any year in particular, like what has been shown to us is that the players you don't expect to go very far can go very far. And like not necessarily speaking to a specific region, like it might not even be someone who performed like well before, but like for example, like I think of like Mal Harada, right? Like I didn't even know about them until they got top 4 at Worlds last year, you know? And now they like build a lot of teams with Zine, and you know, they're probably potentially running the same team because they use the same thing in Victory Road on the Road to Yokohama tournament, right? So I feel like there's definitely a lot of room for you know, like some like surprise like new player to really take it. I can't quantify who, obviously, because like, you know, that's really hard to do, but I just wouldn't be surprised, honestly.
Also, interesting take on that is that this is, I guess, for now, the last Worlds where we had a CP bar, at least going into next year. So more people have qualified. We talked about the numbers, like 800 players like signed up for Worlds right now. So there's definitely a wider range. Like going into next season, only 75 players from EU, 75 from NA will qualify. So there's an extra reason for people who might have just qualified by reaching the CP bar this year to go as deep as possible, because they might not have the time or resources to compete for those 75 slots next year. And also, of course, just there's more players playing at Worlds.
Right. I mean, I guess, you know, to follow up, to ask y'all more questions on that, right? So, you know, we've talked about, like, obviously, you know, the game and, like, how newer players have performed well and, like, veteran players, right? But in terms of actual, like, meta trends at Worlds, right? So talking about, you know, just straight up Regulation G, like, what we expect the field to be like, right? Looking, like, obviously the horses and Miraidon have been like the big like threats that everyone's been focusing on, right? What if you had to give like a breakdown of what you think top 8 will be in restricteds, right? What do you think that would break down into? If you had to guess how many, like which restricteds and exactly how many of them in cut. And we'll come back to this after Worlds.
Okay. I feel like a Zacian makes it into top 8. No Zama. Zacian's going to outperform Zama. And then I would give it like 3 Miraidons, 2 Shadow Riders, 2 Ice Riders, and a Kyogre. I think that's 8 Mons.
I think that's 9. Was that 9 or am I crazy?
That was 9. 3 Miraidon. Okay, I'm gonna cut a Shadow Rider because everyone respects Shadow Rider a lot. So we're gonna say 1 Shadow Rider, 2 Ice Riders, 3 Miraidons, and a Zacian.
All right.
What do you 2 Kyogres just outside in like top 16.
That makes sense. Yeah. Kyogre, I definitely would expect to see, because dude, it always sneaks into like the top cut or like a little bit like outside the top cut. There's just like a bunch of them for some reason. You're like, what the heck, man? But yeah, Baris, what do you think if you had the
I think it's like Calyrex Shadow will be a little bit heavy in top cut. I wouldn't be surprised to see 4 Calyrex Shadow. I think people will, out of the 2 horses, I think people will have better or easier lines into Calyrex Ice, just because it's like slower, it needs the setup. Whereas, like, if you just get one turn, I don't want to say if you get one turn wrong, but like, it is easier for Calyrex Shadow to just like overrun your team. Like, if they break your sashes and then come in, Astral Barrage, take knockouts, boost, it's very easy to take away from there. So I think Calyrex Shadow is going to outperform Calyrex Ice. I'm going to say 3 or 4 Calyrex Shadows. Miraidon, I see it rising up popularity. Let's give it 2. So we have 6 in total. 1 Kyogre and then 1 wild pick. I will leave that open, but I don't think it's going to be
no
1 wild
Riders
card
in top 8. It's a crazy prediction.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. I will say no Ice Rider, and let's have a hot take in here. No Ice Rider.
I mean, hey, it's fair, right? I think honestly, so I would say there's going to be 1 Ice Rider. I think only 1. I think there's going to be 2 Shadow Riders. I think there's going to be 3 Miraidon, 2 Kyogre, and then there's going to be a random restricted.
That's 9, Joe.
Oh, that is 9? Okay, well then. My bad. Then no random restricted. I think then whatever I said, so 2 Miraidon or 3 Miraidon. Did I say 3 Miraidon?
Yeah.
It's a 3 Miraidon, 2 Kyogre, 2 Cali Shadow, 1
2 Kyogres is brave as well. I mean, I said 2 in top 16. If those 2 just win, then you have your prediction.
Yeah, right.
So,
yeah. I feel like this might be a year where you just see like you know, you like I know we were talking about like how they're cool creative teams. I could also very well just see like the 4 best guys just win out, you know, like the 4 best restricteds, you know.
It is one of those like tournaments where like I do feel like we're gonna see a decent amount of creativity in day 2,
Mm-hmm.
like represented in day 2, but like where I get stuck is the creativity in this format feels like you're buying into a weaker team, and like at a regional you could outplay like 95% of the field. At Worlds, like, can I go into a match against Aurelia with a creative team where like my team is just a little weaker? Probably not. Like, I probably just lose to Aurelian at that point. Like, I could probably bet, like, you know, like if like Wolf were to bring like funny 2023 Wolf stuff, like Wolf probably could still outplay a lot of the people in like day 1. But like, if you're bringing something that isn't as strong, are you going to win against the other people who are like the best players in the world? I don't know. So I think like decent amount of like creativity in like top 32, top 64, but top 8, yeah.
Yeah, I'm a revisionist history my my pick a little bit. I'm gonna take one Miraidon out for one Terapagos because I think I'm disrespecting Pagos a little bit.
So that's actually an interesting thing to like maybe talk about meta wise real quick. Like Pagos, like Baris kind of brought this up a little earlier. Like Pagos was like doing pretty well right up until NAIC, and then it got second at NAIC, and then VR happened, and there were no Pagos in day 2. I think like what happened is that like the Calyrex Shadow Rider teams figured out how to deal with Pagos, and like Pagos' biggest selling point was that it had like a really good matchup into Shadow Rider. But like, what do you guys think? Like, what happened?
Do you want to go first, Baris, or should I take this first?
You can take it first.
All right. So I do want to just add one more factor that I think people maybe aren't considering as much, even if that might be the case, right? The Latin America trends going into all the regionals were that there was a lot of Terapagos and Zamazenta, right? So like, even though it might not be the most optimal choice into the field, I feel like a lot of players who have had like less practice from those regions might still opt to go with something similar to what they were using like early meta, right? Because the development's very different, I feel like, in some other places, because we had NAIC, Japan obviously had Japan Nats, and now they're playing best of 3, so it's very different. But I feel like every region kind of has its own trends, and one thing I noticed in Latin America particularly was lots of Pagos, lots of Zamazenta, so I still actually think there will be a good chunk of them. I don't necessarily disagree with your theory. I also think the added thing is that a lot of Miraidon teams started running Iron Hands, which gives Pagos a lot of trouble, right? Actually, almost all of the meta ones have it now, pretty much. But essentially, like, I feel like the biggest thing is that maybe because Latin America would, be the region you would expect to bring the most of those restricteds, the builds from Latin America particularly are usually a little bit weirder than like the meta builds that people normally use, right? So like, it's not always that different, but I feel like that could throw some people off if they've prepped for those restricteds in the standard versions of them versus like the weirder versions of them, right? So
talking about weirder versions, what do you think about the rock polish meteor beam?
The Japan Nats one, right?
I sure did try playing with that. It felt weird. I feel like I don't know if it's like a me thing, but like I try some of these teams that come out of Japan Nats, and like I go to Open Team Sheet BO3 ladder, and they just don't feel as good as I was expecting them to. And like I don't know, like it is like we always talk about how like Japan like as a region like fundamentally approaches team building differently. So like maybe it's that as well, but like some of these teams like the Meteor Beam Pagos like
a little nuts.
Doesn't compute with me. I'm just like, well, why would you not just run specs and not have to hit a Meteor Beam that doesn't KO Incineroar?
I think the idea is that you basically, after one Meteor Beam, you're the same as the specs version, but you can still like protect and change your moves. As the obvious answer to that, but I think it's not that easy to just look at Terapagos and see how it can perform well. But I mean, there's definitely the Callman version, the specs version, the crazy rock polish Meteor Beam version, I suppose, and see how they will perform.
The other thing to consider is that like if the greater community has like decided that Pagos is not going to be a threat at this Worlds, all of a sudden Pagos becomes a threat at Worlds, right? Like if you're like, oh, Calm Mind Pagos isn't real, I don't need to have like 3 things on my team that help me deal with Calm Mind Pagos, and then you like hit Calm Mind Pagos, okay, like have fun. Like,
Yeah.
So like especially if you have like a thing where it's like, oh, I'll cycle fake outs to like stop it from setting up, and like you hit the guy who's running covert cloak. It's like, oh, cool. So I think like there's definitely space for Pagos players to do well. Especially if they hit the people who are not prepared for Pagos. So like I don't know, it's there is some level of like matchup pulling that needs to happen if you're running it, I think, but yeah, I don't know. It's a weird mon right now to me.
I think one thing that Pagos is really does really different than the other restricteds is I mean Calyrex Shadow, even though it typically has a couple different items, typically operates very similar ways, right? Whereas like Pagos, it can be Calm Mind, it can be Specs, it can be Meteor Beam, right? It could do a bunch of different things, which I feel like is really unique. And I feel like that's like overall like a very kind of cool thing about it. But yeah, as our final like worlds thing before we move on, because we got to talk about Reg H eventually, right? Because it's a new format, that's like the cool thing, right? Going into worlds, right? Obviously we all have very different perspectives. I mean, Stefan, you started probably the latest out of all of us playing VGC, right? And then Baris, you've been around like forever, right? So like pretty much.
It's actually the second worlds in Hawaii for me.
Yeah,
with
that's
the first
nuts.
with the first one being like 12 years ago, 2012. So it's a nice like full circle that I've been now. But yes, back to your question.
Yeah. So basically, I guess my question for y'all is, I guess from different experiences, right? Like, what do you think is the most successful, like, quote unquote, best approach to worlds, right? So, like, in your time playing the game, right? Like, for you seeing all the world champions and everything. So, with your experience specifically, right? Like, what do you think is usually the best approach to worlds, and what approach do you think wins the most? And we'll start with Baris, because Baris has like years and years in this game.
I always used to say, and as I think that's actually what you, Joe, are thriving off. Confidence is key. I mean, you can only be confident if you put in the work, of course. But the moment I really liked your intro where you said like going into the venue, I know that I have put in like all the reps, all the prep. I've done my part. Now it's just playing the tournament, I suppose. And I always like to remind myself that even though VGC is like a super hard game, at the end of the day, we're just clicking a few buttons like once every minute, basically. So there's no reason why anyone is better at button clicking than anyone else. As in, like, there's no reason why you can't beat the other person. Like, if I were to play melee and I go out and show up and the guy is just like faster with his inputs and just beats me, well, then there's little I can do. But in this game, like, if you put in the prep, if you have your alliance, if you know what to do, basically, he can like mash you in buttons. Basically, it's a straightforward game, I suppose. That's why I like to think you can beat anyone. There's not such a thing as someone just being, I guess, significant. Of course, some players are better than others, but like, if you put in the work, you can beat anyone, and that, as long as you remind yourself of that, I think that's a very good way to look at the game, I suppose.
Stefan, what do you think?
I am the least qualified person to talk about this because I've played in one real Worlds and then last year had the whole team sheet thing. So I feel like for Worlds though, like it there are a few factors, right? Like I think you have to be very honest with yourself about your own skill level and what your goals are and the level of players that you're likely to play in trying to accomplish those goals. So like if I go in, I think that I am capable of outplaying people on day one. If I'm playing well, I think I can outplay the people on day one. I think I can make day two. Therefore, if my goal is to make day two, running something that is consistent is the best way to do that. If we were to simulate the tournament 100 times, the best result I would get is if I ran something consistent and played it well. If my goal is to win Worlds, I'm probably not going to win against like people in Top Cut as often with a hyper consistent team that is just honest. So like if I were to go in and I'm like let's say it was my last Worlds and I'm like at the level that I am now, I'm like, all right, if I really want to just give myself the best shot at winning Worlds, that's when I lock something like play rough Zashi and Meteor Beam Lunala, something where I'm like, all right, I think if I hit all my moves, this team is better. It gives me a better chance against like the top players. So like, sure, I'll try. So like we talked a little bit about like the CP bar being gone next year. there might be some players who are at this tournament. I mean, there are players at this tournament who will not qualify next year. And if those players look at their tournament and they're like, all right, I don't think I have the time or the resources or the level to like qualify for Worlds next year, and they want to just give it a shot to go as far as possible, then like those are the kinds of people I think who will have the best results if they lock something that is volatile but with a very high power ceiling.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas like if you're like somebody like Riley, for example, Riley is allergic to running inaccurate moves. So Riley goes into tournaments thinking, if I remove variance from the game, I will win more often than I will lose. So like somebody like Riley will probably have more success playing a more honest team that relies less on those kinds of things. So I think it does kind of depend a little bit on you as a player, and getting the best result relies on you being honest with yourself about like which approach is best for your goals.
Mm-hmm.
To add on to that, I think there's two approaches to look at. To do well, you can either the team carries you or you carry the team. That's basically just to describe what Stefan was talking about. And I think if you want to win Worlds, then you need a team that can carry you, and you need to be able to like perform or like play the team at the highest level. But going into Worlds, if you want to do well, either you carry the team or the team carries you. And that's how you will have a deep run, I suppose.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my answer might be, I mean, kind of similar, I guess, to what Baris said on confidence. I think that's pretty important, right, going into any tournament. And I think more specifically for Worlds, like if you think about how the general field is going to be, right, a lot of people sitting down for their first Worlds or at Worlds are like super nervous. They might be a little scared to go for, you know, some crazy plays or like stuff and be a bit more conservative. And kind of having, like, removing that aspect of fear from like your plays can give you an edge in just some matches. That is just straight up like an advantage if you can like manage your nerves, right? But it was interesting because, you know, in my Worlds prep, because I know I was talking about like practicing and playing a bunch of games, I actually made it a point to talk to Ray Rizzo actually, and I asked him, I was like, what do you think, right, was like the biggest contribution to you winning, and what do you think is like the key to winning Worlds? And he gave me really like kind of an answer actually of what Baris almost said, right? He said, I guess technically you as well, Stefan. He was like, I would bring the most consistent team I could. Like, I would be okay taking some risks on the team, like some things I can miss, but I would take like the most consistent team if I was confident that I was better than like most people in that building, right? So like, in my opinion, actually, it makes a lot of sense as an approach to me, right? I think the thing with the volatile teams is like, if you feel like, I think there's almost a level of like understanding of the volatile team sometimes though. Like, for example, like a Sun team, right? Like I can tell you from someone who's played Sun a bunch, like, yeah, you could just lose the missing sleep powders, but if you're good with Sun, like it's not just going to be like that every time, right? Like there are ways you can navigate boards to, even if you miss, the pressure of doing that like forces them into a play, right? So I think like with volatile teams, there is a benefit to that. But if you are confident that you're like one of the best players in the building and you have the best chance to like outplay everyone else, like with like something consistent or like something with less risk, like you should just bring a consistent team, right? Because if you think you're the better one there, like you should just be bringing a team where you can outplay someone regardless. So at least that's like how I think about it, right? If the format's at a point where like, for example, like let's say CSR balance was even more polarizing than it was, right? Let's say it was like objectively the best team in the format, right? And there was like no other teams that could contest it, right? Then like maybe there would be, you know, a bit more draw to run like something that's less consistent, because it's like, well, I don't want to use the meta team that everyone's using and play a mirror everywhere, right? So I'd rather use a team that's more volatile, but then like someone's not as prepared for it, right? Whereas in this format, I feel like there are a lot of like high skill level compositions you could play that like kind of suit different play styles, right? Like Miraidon suits offensive players, Kali Shadows suits like kind of, you know, like the hyper balance, like, you know, specific plays, like precise plays pretty much. And then Kali Ice is kind of a good middle ground where you can kind of make like, I almost call it like the VGC chess AI robot plays. You know what I mean? Like you click like Glacial Lance and switch, or you click like Fake Out Lance, or you click like Trick Room switch, like just like basic plays that like always net you value, even though it's like a really like telegraphed play, right? So that's really interesting. But that's pretty much my thoughts on it. Do you guys have any final thoughts on Worlds or anything before we move on? Or
one thing I want to add, I think that's interesting, is that for the first time we know in advance that we won't have a post Worlds metagame, but Reg G is officially coming back in January, which I wonder if that will have any impact on maybe potentially players putting in more thought, effort into Reg G, because they know, hey, this is not only Worlds, this isn't even the last tournament either. So any prep you do right now will also be beneficial come January. So I think that's an interesting aspect to look into. Yeah, I think that.
I think just to build off of that as well, there's a lot of people on socials who are upset that Reg G is coming back, and understandably to it, it's a very, very centralizing format, which can kind of make people not have a lot of fun with the format. But something that's worth remembering, if you're somebody who has just switched to Reg H early, more power to you. But if you really don't like Reg G and you're not happy that Reg G is coming back, because you don't like the current metagame or whatever, something that is worth remembering is that we had this happen twice in Sword and Shield, where they reused a formats 7 and 9, and and then also there was another one where 7 and 9 were the same.
7 to 9, and then it was 8 and 11.
8 and 11 were the same. And in both of those cases, those formats, especially the single restricted format, was very, very centralizing. But then when it came back, the meta was completely different. So it I would just caution the doom and gloom out there. If you don't like this format and you're upset that it's coming back, it'll probably be a completely different meta, and maybe there's some cool stuff that you can do. So that'll be fun.
I guess to add on a little doom and gloom though, for what it's worth, I felt Series 11, even though it was Series 11, not specific, Series 9 was fine. I felt there was meta development there. Yeah. But by Series 11, I just remember everyone being so tired, and they're I don't want to play this format. Literally, I think that was when people were doing Brilliant Diamond Shining Pearl VGC.
Oh, you're right.
They did it, they hated it so much. They were just I don't even want to play this format. Let's just do a fun grassroots format. I guess the difference is obviously there'll be official tournaments, so it's a little bit better. But yeah, I don't know. I feel there will definitely be meta development. I think they will be different formats. Actually, I 100% agree with you on that. But I could definitely see people also being man, why do I gotta play this format? It's so sad. I just wish for those formats, right, they just put them back to back instead of splitting them up, because then it's almost feels like you're going backwards sometimes. But I'll play anything, so who am I to complain?
I'm actually interested to see how that plays out, because in the past, we had these post-Worlds metagame where for a few months at least, we would just play whatever the Worlds format was for September, October, maybe November. This time, we'll see what is successful. Then, of course, immediately after Worlds, Reg H starts. So it's going to be interesting. But we will have quite a bit of time to process what happened at Worlds, how the metagame developed. And then there might be some community events in Reg G throughout the fall break, basically. But I think it's really going to be interesting to see, hey, we have learned quite a bit at Worlds. Where can we take it from here? So instead of everyone just copy pasting one of the top 8 teams and bring it to the next regional, we'll have quite a bit of time to give it a little bit more development, which I actually think could be beneficial for the first time going into a post-Worlds metagame.
Yeah,
I think I guess it's a pure speculation at this point, but the only reason they would bring back Reg G is because then for Worlds next year they want to have double restricted, I suppose.
Yeah, that makes sense to me.
So that could also be an interesting development of how the format will go, because we don't really have a new game for next. We'll play on Skull and Violet again for Worlds, I suppose, next year. So yeah, dual restricted, and that's obviously a completely different metagame again.
Actually, we're just gonna play Reg G for Worlds again.
Yeah. I mean, hey. Yeah. I have a theory, right? We'll move. I guess we'll move on to talk about Reg H after this. But I have this theory, right? They're bringing back Regulation G, but there will be another DLC since there have been no announced mainline games coming up, and the DLC will include Xerneas and Yveltal, and it will change up the metagame because those two are introduced, and it'll warm us up for double restricted Worlds. If there isn't, that's fine. But I just wanted to put my theory out there, so if it does happen, I could be see guys, they big brained this. They were really thinking ahead, which would be pretty awesome. But yeah.
That'd be cool.
Yeah.
I mean, Xerneas and single restricted with Terra would definitely shake up the meta.
Yeah, that's what I mean, right? Like that. Imagine you were thinking like it's just gonna be regular, and then they're like, "Oh, guys, guess what we brought back?" And then you're like, "Oh." But yeah. So moving on to Reg H, actually, since we brought it up, right? What are your guys' initial thoughts and impressions? You guys look at this format, you're like, "Yo, this is awesome. This is what I wanted from Pokemon my whole life." Or were you thinking like, "Oh man, like shucks, I wanted to play like more stronger restricted." Oh, I see. You got the mouse.
Oh, they're back! They're back! Yeah!
That's me, I was just like, okay.
So
I get to beat up and rage fist people again for another 6 months. We're so back.
Classic.
So yeah, beyond looking at like what archetypes are going to be good in Reg G and Reg H, Regulation H, I suppose. For a very long time, I thought that we should have this. I don't even know how to call it. We should have this like standard format or expanded format, as you might want to call it, that can just be played in like on any game. So it has to have specific rule sets. And the one rule that I thought about was basically, is it called daycare rule set? Basically, only allow Pokemon that you can breed. Right? And if you think about Regulation H, it's essentially that. The only exception is Blood Moon or Ursaluna. But beyond that, you can only use Pokemon that you can breed. So the power level, I guess, is a little bit more balanced. I mean, we don't know how the format is going to shape out.
Well, something that's also really like a little bit important about that is that it also makes the format very accessible.
Yes,
like,
correct.
Except for the Blood Moon is, maybe a little less. But like, you could play every other Pokemon in the format just by breeding, which is great. Like, even if you don't have access to like some of the mons because you like version exclusives or whatever, like it's very easy to hit somebody up and be like, "Yo, can you breed me this thing?" It's great. Like, I think that's really, really good, especially for a post-Worlds format. Like, Worlds always creates hype for the game. There's always new players who watch Worlds and are like, "Wow, this looks cool. I want to play." And like, especially like Reg D last year, like you come out of that, you're like, I can't wait to get into this game. It's like, okay, spend $250. Whereas like this kind of a format is like way easier for people to get into and introduce them to the game. And I think that's great.
Yeah. I think for myself, I'm not moved. It's okay. It's fine. Like I wasn't like I heard the announcement at first because I was at a local. It was like a 9-person local or whatever, and someone's like, "Yo, bro, we got the Reg H rules." I'm like, "Oh, you're trolling me, right?" Like I was like, "Whatever." Like we're playing Reg G still, and then he's like, "Oh yeah, no, like everything is banned except for like like national dex mons basically, right? And like no legendaries." I was like, "Oh, for real?" I like look at him like, all right, I guess, and I just put my phone down and keep playing Regulation G. So like my impressions are very like, it's okay, right? Like it's fine. It's a format that should have happened, right? So like I think it's a little bit out of order in my opinion. I would have preferred if it came before Regulation D, right? Because it would have made before Regulation D, right? Because it would have made sense. I guess Blood Moon or Ursaluna technically is like the exception in there because it came after, right? And then Regulation DE, like I felt like that would have been a better natural buildup of like the formats. That being said, right, it's different, so I can't complain that much, right? I would have been like more like if it was like going back to an old format. So I like that they're at least doing something different. Although I think the order is a little bit weird, I'm still like like it's like cool. Like you'll see Pokemon we didn't see do well for a while be good again, right? The only thing that's like a little bit like anime is like I feel like because Instant and Rill are in the format, like you basically just like still have a very similar metagame except for the fact that like obviously Raging Bolt doesn't exist. What I mean is like in terms of like what the top Pokemon are, right? So Regulation A for me, in my opinion, actually was my least favorite format of Scarlet Violet. So if it's like Reg A, I might like it a bit less. But that being said, right, I definitely think on the accessibility thing, that's where it's really nice, that people can actually like get into the game, like play it. And it's not like, oh, I got to like get like, my Sword and Shield game so I can get a Zacian or like a Zamazenta, so.
Mm-hmm. I also just like it because Mousehold and Golden Go are really good in the format. And I like those little goobers.
Yeah, that's fair. You were saying something, Baris?
Oh yeah, I think I'm actually not sure on this, but I think you can you catch at this point any Pokemon that is in the game without having to transfer anything? As in like in terms of for Regulation H?
Oh, for H. Yes. Yes, I want to say yes.
So that's, I guess, a pretty big positive.
Yes.
There.
If you have the DLC, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah. So I guess that's actually a good thing to note too. That's actually kind of cool, right? The fact that you can kind of get everything you need. I think that's definitely like a positive thing. And to follow up actually on Regulation H, right? Because obviously, we talked about our impressions of like how excited we are or whatever, right? Are there any particular Pokemon that you think have like really underperformed since like, the earlier formats that's going to come back in like full force? Obviously, for me, Palafin's like the big one because Palafin's like one of the only good water types now. So, that kind of changes that. But like, what else do you think might come back in like full force that like hasn't been doing as well?
I think Mouse Ape is crazy in this format. Like, I think it's very easy to run Mouse Ape in like kind of an NPC way that isn't very good. But like, you add Incin to the format, like it's another reason why Ape's really good. And then on top of that, like Reg A Mouse Ape was kind of crazy. Like Reg B, like it was still really good, I think. Like Bundle Flutter became like a little problematic for it. And then in Reg C, when like Chi Yu Flutter became a thing, then it's like, all right, like maybe it's time to let go. Like I'm holding on with like one finger. I'm like, no, it'll still work. But like at this point, like a lot of the things that counter Mouse Ape are like not in the decks. I think it's going to be one of those mons or one of those archetypes that like is used by a lot of people who don't use it very well, which might cause it to be under-respected when good players roll up with it. Like I think a lot about like when Hari was running it in early Scarlet and Violet. Like for a long time, like I would also run it long after most people stopped using it, and like most people that I played at events would be like, oh, well, I just assumed I wouldn't have Mouse Ape. I really don't want to play against you. And then, like, you pair into them and they have no answer for it because, like, there's three people who are, like, using them on in like, a threatening way, like, at the regional. It's like, that's kind of cool, like, if that comes back. But I just think, like, they never really got the finish that I thought they were capable of getting. So maybe they can get a good finish in Reg H.
I want to actually connect one Pokemon between Reg H and G without going back too much further. Dondozo. An obvious answer is going to be a tricky Pokemon to deal with in Regulation H. I actually have also seen a specific composition on Letter at the moment, the Galarian, Weezing, Calyrex, Shadow, Dondozo teams. And I honestly think like I'm still looking into how to beat that properly.
Yeah,
because it has because it has so many options.
It's really
the idea is it turns off all abilities. Calyrex Shadow is just very oppressive, dealing damage. You don't have your booster energies to activate to like deal more damage or even outspeed the Calyrex Shadow. So that is just a lot of damage. And on top of all of that, you need to find a way to like KO the Weezing. Otherwise, it will just set up toxic spikes, and then Dondozo becomes a big problem, I think.
And the other thing as well is that like neutralizing gas doesn't turn off Calyrex's ability.
Yeah.
Yep.
Which is kind of crazy.
Yeah. It's kind of funny actually, because that team, whenever I see it, I'm like, oh, free points. I just move on because like it's funny. I guess it's just like some teams like are really good into like a lot of like the like meta teams, right? But if you just have like this one specific mon on your team or like one specific build, I'm just like, oh, awesome. I was like, I'll take this and then just move on to the next game. But it's actually really funny. But yeah, I think Dondozo is going to be crazy in
yeah. I will say like something else that's like it did get nerfed after Reg A, so like Dondozo was obviously just insanely broken in Reg A, but like the order up nerf was helpful. Like there are more mons in the game that can act as like an answer to it. A few more haze users, like just generally more like Incin is in the game, which like Dondozo clicks Wave Crash, but like it's something. Like there are more Rillaboom's in the game. There's more mons that like slow down the Dozo, so I think it's going to be really annoying, but I think it's going to be a lot more fair than it was in Reg A.
Yeah, I think Oblivious Dozo is going to be the best one, just because
probably, that makes sense.
I think being not able to be cycled by Incineroar is pretty important, right? And if you can be cycled by Incineroar, you're going to be in for a very miserable time. I think actually
could be good too.
Yeah, my hot take is that the best Dozo, right, is going to be Terra Poison, Terra Blast, Wave Crash with Covert Cloak and Oblivious, because you can't fake it out, you can't intimidate it. So essentially, you can sit in front of Incineroar really easily. So
I think that's a really good idea.
That's my prediction.
I don't like that. Hey Joe, you want to build that Dondozo for
yeah, don't air this part, guys. Don't air this part.
Edit this out. Put it out as a clip after Joe wins Baltimore.
Yep.
Did you guys sign up for Baltimore? I think Dortmund
Yeah,
registration also
I
went up
did,
today.
yeah. You're doing Dortmund, right?
I'm actually like, I don't say this lightly, but I'm taking a step back and I might not compete.
No!
Yeah.
Brother.
Oh my goodness.
I think.
What?
I mean, let's see how Worlds goes, but
Are
probably
you
not
announcing your retirement on the podcast, bro?
the exclusive interview with Billa
Oh
VGC is
my
announcing his
goodness.
retirement. No, I will definitely. I've played this game for quite a while. Did quite well here and there, but I mean, you will still see me at events, right? I will still be like traveling to the big events, I suppose. I kind of want to. I actually like the best finish limit between regionals and internets being mixed because less tournaments to play. I guess you could, if I could get enough time off, I might only play ICs. But like they just, yeah, no, I don't think
Damn.
people who announce their retirements, they never really retire. I will just step back a little bit. Only play a few selected tournaments. So I'm sitting out Dortmund, probably not playing Stuttgart or any of the other Reg H events either. I guess. I mean, it's not my plan, but I could see other players saying like, "Hey, this Reg H stuff is not for me. I'm going to focus on Worlds, take a break in fall, and then come back for Reg H for Reg G in January, and then for Worlds onwards." So I will see how I feel, how much time I have in the second half of the season. Might also make it dependent on how UIC goes, but I did actually like play quite a bit of events this year. I think Joe and I looked at the lists of regional attendances this year, and I think Joe was number 1 with like 15 regionals.
Oops, my bad.
Or international events, at least the ones registered on Arcanine.
Yep.
And I think it was somewhere up there with like 12.
Yeah, me too.
And I did like, I had the mistake last season with like doing really well at the beginning and then kind of being forced to play on the whole season. And luckily it just worked out to be like 16th in Europe. But at least for next year, we're like no CP bar. 70. I honestly think 75 players is a lot of players. If you put in the time and effort, like, and you have a certain skill set, you shouldn't have to worry about 75. But I understand that for a lot of players who just hit the CP bar this year, it's going to be a rough time next year having to compete. And I also think that we haven't fully processed on how the new CP distribution actually works because it's so much top heavy. You can't just like rock up, do a few top 128 to 56 or whatever, and then someone make it in. You actually need those big finishes. So that's going to
like
shape
locals
up.
matter less.
Locals matter less, correct. You also have fewer locals and you have more time. Locals already started in July. Some people already have over 100, maybe 200 CP. But that won't matter in the big run. I think playing IC is very important, and having deep runs at region is also going to be important. But yeah, at least for the beginning of the season, I'm stepping back a little bit.
You think you're clever, Barish, but like I see what he's doing, Joe. Yeah. Pedon's announced he was stepping back last year, and my guy day 2 Worlds.
Okay,
so I see.
Okay, all right. I see the vision. I see the vision.
Yeah. I mean, definitely doing well at Worlds, but also at the same time, like I have not had enough time or enough motivation, enough ambition to like really hard prep for Worlds this year. So I'm going to take it a little bit easier. Of course, doing well would, I don't know, like give me a reason to continue playing. But I also did like really poorly in the last couple of months. Which was just a result of not putting enough time, I suppose. And I also hitting a certain age, want to focus on my private life a little bit more. Want to see how far I can get with my job, and take that to the next level, I suppose. Whereas at the moment, I was still like compromising it to a certain level and making sure that I have enough time for Pokemon. Whereas like the big issue for me personally, if you play Pokemon without putting in the time, it's like kind of wasted. So I think if you take it serious, do it like semi-professional or like super competitive, then it's like a great game and you can like thrive of those results. But playing Pokemon without prep, you might as well do other things, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, that's fair. Yeah, I mean, real life be like that sometimes. I get it, This guy, he's like, I already bodied so many kids, even though I'm this old man, like it's easy, So I get it, gotta give him a chance once in a while. But hopefully, of course, you mentioned you will still be going to international. So we'll hang out there, obviously.
I already booked EUIC because it's actually on my birthday weekend.
Oh hell yeah!
Nice, let's go.
So I will see you all in London for sure. Beyond that, I think Brazil is going to be difficult, and I have to say, like New Orleans was amazing this year. So I would really love to run it back.
Gotta come back.
Yeah, gonna come back. I think if I do well at UIC, then I will look into booking maybe a few regionals in between and then NAIC. But yeah, it's gonna come down to how Regulation G is shaping up in February in London.
Yeah. I mean, maybe this time we won't run Ditto Lando I at and the IC. Maybe we'll run a better team together and do better.
Hopefully, absolutely.
Yes, but no, obviously, it's been a great podcast. Thank you for you guys being on. I mean, I guess like kind of the final thing that I thought would be fun for the question of the week. This is from Sierra herself, actually. So, excluding competitive reasons and VGC, right? What is your favorite Pokemon to play, Pokemon game to play through, and why?
Outside the main games, one game that I really enjoyed playing was Pokemon Ranger. I think it was one of the first spin-offs that I played on the DS back in the days. And I actually played it, like playing through it. I think it was the game that you got the Manaphy Act at the end as well, transferring that to, was it Diamond and Pearl, maybe Platinum? I definitely have good memories of playing Pokemon Rangers, so that is definitely up there. I haven't played the Mystery Dungeon games too much, but I've only heard good things about them as well.
Mystery Dungeon is pretty sweet. Those games are pretty awesome, actually.
I love me some Pokemon Coliseum, baby. Great game.
Yeah, I think for myself, okay, well, it can't be competitive reasons or VGC, so that kind of, I have two options I can narrow it down to with that. So, Pokemon Battle Revolution, awesome game. One of the first games I ever played on the Wii, and it was like super like cool. I thought it was like the best game ever, right? And this was back when I was still learning like how to play Pokemon and everything when I got Diamond and Pearl. And the cross compatibility with it was really cool. You know how you could like move your box over so you could play with your Pokemon there, and like indirectly the competitive nature of like having to beat like the stronger and stronger trainers was pretty appealing to me, right? But not necessarily VGC related. And then I'd say my other favorite game, not necessarily because it was like the best game in the series, but I think Heart Gold and Soul Silver I really liked because and Black and White 2 to an extent as well for this reason. But the games that had like the really fleshed out like special event Pokemon where like it wasn't just like a random mystery gift where it's like, oh hey, you just got this like random cool guy, you know? It's like, nah, like you got to go to this island and like Victini's there if you have like a special pass, or like, you know, in Heart Gold Soul Silver you get one of like the with like the Arceus event, right? You can get like one of the level 1 Giratina, Dialga, Palkia stuff. That's like stuff like that's like really cool, you know? And that's like one thing actually that like I really miss from like modern Pokemon games is like we still have like some like events or like stuff, and like the games obviously are getting like better and better. But I miss like some of the more simpler, like, oh, just go to this random island and catch this mythical Pokemon, or like, oh, go to this, you know, random place where there's like this like Heatran sitting in the volcano, you know, just like stuff like that. It's pretty cool. So, yeah, I don't know. It's just like that's to me is like really appealing for a Pokemon game. So, as well too, you know, obviously we are nearing the end of the podcast, so. Baris, do you have any socials you would like to shout out, or anything you would like to shout out for the viewers to check out at home?
I mean, if you want to follow the Worlds Run, it's definitely worth checking out x.com/BillaVGC, I suppose. That's where I go by mainly, post updates, maybe also from the holiday itself. I think Hawaii has a lot to offer, and I might post like some updates on how the trip is going, activities, and of course, like beyond the tournament, Worlds is such a big like event. There's so much more going on other than just like the competition itself. So there will also be some updates about that. But of course, also check out the official stream. Ideally, we have a deep enough run to be featured there as well. And then you don't even need to check out. Yeah.
What about you, Stefan? Go ahead.
Yeah, my Twitter is at Pengy Twitch. My stream is twitch.tv/Pengy with 2 Ys. I don't really stream that much right now. I've been focusing a little bit more on actually playing well and hopefully having a good Worlds run. But yeah, that's basically it. And yeah, hopefully we can at least 2 of us need to make it on stream.
That'd be pretty cool.
That's a good
All
goal.
3 of us.
I mean, that's the actual goal. But if I go 0-3 again, you guys can do it, okay?
Yeah, well, we'll figure it out, right? We can do it. I bet. Maybe 2 of us will be against each other.
Round 1.
Not. Okay, I don't know about that.
Well, me and Billa played round 1 at LAIC with Rose and Lou casting, and they didn't pull us, and it was the most disappointing thing ever.
That's so funny. Yeah. For my own socials, Joe UX9 on everything. You want to check out some awesome coaching, get better at the game, x9academy.com. That's all I gotta say. But obviously, thank you everyone for listening, all the viewers at home for opening up, the podcast and listening to us 3 talk about it, even though we're completely different hosts than the 2 that are normally here. For those wondering, there will be an episode next week. Newsflash, it's gonna be in Hawaii, a physical OHKO episode. And Joe Brown and Tia are going to be doing their Worlds predictions. So get hyped for that, guys, because you'll get to see live OHKO predictions. I mean, I'm assuming there'll be a video or something, but maybe not. I don't know. But yeah. Anyways, thank you, Baris. Thank you, Stefan, for coming on. And yeah, pretty much that's it. So thanks, guys. Catch you next one. Peace.